Now, I'm delighted to tell you that Monzo Business are now a proud partner of The Rest is Money. We're teaming up for the next 6 months. You'll be hearing why they're a great option for your business banking and how they're supporting small businesses up and down the UK. Now, since I am a Monzo Business customer already, I can tell you all about it. They've got 3 different plans to choose from depending on the size of your business. So, for example, with 2 of us in mind, me and my business partner, in our latest venture, we've opted for the Pro version, which comes with a load of tools to help us simplify all of that financial admin. There's also Light for sole traders and Team for those slightly larger businesses that are scaling up. So why not join me and over 500,000 businesses already banking with Monzo Business and sign up for an account today. Only sole traders or limited company directors in the UK can apply. Invoicing is available with Monzo Business Pro for £9 a month and Team for £25 a month. T's and C's apply.
Hello and welcome to The Rest is Money with me, Robert Peston. Steph, sadly for all of us, is detained elsewhere. She'll be back very soon, but I'm delighted to be joined by Martha Lane Fox, serial entrepreneur. In my experience, one of the most thoughtful, insightful commentators, analysts of where business is going, currently president of the British Chambers of Commerce. It's an absolute joy to see you this morning, Martha. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I thought I'd start with something sort of bang up to date in the sense that it stems from a meeting we were both at recently of representatives of the creative industries. And I was very struck that in a room where we were all trying to sort of be balanced and steady about the prospects for the creative industries, you absolutely lit up and suddenly got very passionate about the shocking fact that women throughout business are still sort of massively struggling, whether it's in the boardroom of established companies getting to the top. The statistics you gave about how hard it is to get proper funding if you're a woman entrepreneur, somebody creating a business. These facts about what looks like endemic discrimination against women in business are really shocking.
Yeah, and they're depressing because they haven't moved much. So the conversation, wasn't it, Robert, was about investment into the creative industry. It's such an important part of our economy, 2.5 million people employed. I think it's 125 billion of contribution to GDP. And I was just making the point that so many of these businesses are small entrepreneurial businesses. And there's an opportunity, in my opinion, to increase that even further if we were to think about a more diverse set of entrepreneurs who are able to start those businesses. And, I just qualify something you said. You said women are struggling. I don't think women struggle. Women are brilliant at their jobs. I think what's happening is that there are points in the chain of things that they might want to do in their career that are not skewed towards enabling that to happen as effectively as they could be. And one of those points is about raising money. And it is kind of horrifying that only 1.8% of venture capital funding goes to female-only led businesses. In that balance, fairness, it is more if it is a co-founding team that is mixed, a man and a woman, like Brent and I were back in the dawn of time at lastminute.com. But female-only businesses, it's horrifying and going backwards, which is even worse. It's marginally down from a couple of years ago. And that matters because you're not tapping into the same pool of talent. There have been lots of studies about this. And one of the things that's been said frequently is that if women-owned businesses were scaled at the same rate that male-only led businesses were scaled at, it could add 250 billion to the economy. Now, obviously, there's a lot to unpick there, but that's a big number.
Sorry, that is just the UK economy?
That's just the UK economy.
So why do you think that those who provide, whether it's seed money or scale-up money for businesses, seemingly prefer either male-dominated businesses or mixed businesses in some way?
A whole host of reasons, but I'm going to pick 3 because for me, these are the biggest ones. The first is that venture capital itself is not very diverse. There are 7% female partners of venture capital businesses now. Therefore, I think you just get a cultural phenomena of just, it's more risky to invest in something that doesn't look and feel like me. I mean, that's not to a person clearly, but if you look at the numbers, that must be one of the reasons. So I think that structurally, it's really important to keep a focus on where the money is coming from as much as where it's going to.
So male-dominated finance
yes,
is part of the problem.
Yes, absolutely. I think the second thing is that we know again, and I find sometimes quite hard to choose the right language here because, often this put culturally that women sort of lack confidence or women don't want to do the same things as men and women somehow don't have this urge to do the same kind of entrepreneurial style businesses. I dispute that. I think it's that we have constructed what success looks like in a very particular vein, and it doesn't always have to be like that, and I blame Silicon Valley a bit for this in the last couple of decades,
So let's break that down a bit. What is the model of success that, for example, the tech industry has that, in your view, makes it harder perhaps for women?
It's maybe just a model that women want to aspire to. So I think it is breaking things, going fast, scaling at all costs, this quite aggressive sense that you have to be a particular way in order to be successful. And I don't think that's true. And I certainly don't think that's true anymore. So I think that cultural point is also super important. And it's not just about tech. I do think it imbues into other sectors. Being an entrepreneur is hard. It's a shame Steph's not here because she seems to be always starting about 16 different businesses, and I really respect and salute her for that. And she will tell you, I'm sure that that's the case. But it doesn't have to be that you have to follow a particular model. You can do it in your own way. That's the great thing about being an entrepreneur. It's not flexible because you have to work really hard and it's tough, but it does provide a slightly different dynamic because you're determining how you want to build the culture yourself. So I think the fact that we have these kind of people that we look up to, supposedly, who are in a very particular vein, doesn't help.
So the kind of Elon Musk, super macho,
but
let's
not,
destroy everything in order to build it kind of approach.
Yep. And, it's not just Elon Musk, though, is it? There are examples, I think, through all of industry and not just in tech. But I do think that's kind of dominating.
There's obviously a famous example of somebody who at the time was deeply admired, but now there's quite a lot of revisionism going on about whether this person really did help women, who is Sheryl Sandberg, who became number 2 at what is now Meta and was Facebook. Where do you stand on whether Sheryl was sort of, in a sense, good or bad for women entrepreneurs?
I think that that's a kind of slightly reductionist question.
Is it?
I do a bit. I think that I don't know. There's a lot of allegations that have popped around in the last period of time. But in my experience of Sheryl, she was extremely kind to me. I remember particularly, she sent me an email when I became a member of the House of Lords and said, well done. And I said, I'm feeling a bit intimidated. And she said, don't be ridiculous. You shouldn't be intimidated. You should go into that space and own it. She didn't have to do that. I'm a diddly squat person to her. So
your experience of her was very positive, very supportive.
But I understand there's some complexity, not only around her, but also what she was saying, which is, it's up to women leaning, which is part of it, yes. But I think there's also some structural stuff as we're discussing.
I mean, I think we do have to recognise that if she thought she was going to reform Mark Zuckerberg, she singularly failed.
Yes, and I don't know if she did think that. And I also think it's somewhat unfair to always put on the women that they were meant to go into a business and do the thing that was, impossible, because he's the founder, he owns the company, he owns most of the shares, he dominates the board, he's clearly the driving force in that business. And often it's the narrative is, oh, a woman comes in, they'll deal with it. Why? Why can't the man just be better, as opposed to the woman having to be the person that makes them better? And just to finish on my 3 points, we've got the finance, we've got the cultural piece, and then I think the final bit we do have to recognise is that from as early in education into a university, into how companies are structured, it is often true that women feel less confident about the spaces they're allowed in and to be risk-taking or to be more, ambitious. And I wish it was not the case, but all the numbers show that's how women feel, and we have to think very carefully. I don't think it's one bit. I don't think it's just school. I don't think it's just as you go into work. I think it's a huge number of factors, but it's important again to recognise that there is something that girls and then turning into women feel about their relative confidence levels in the workplace, and so therefore it's another big part of it.
So on that issue of confidence, it is 25 years since you were essentially the face of the growing optimistic British digital industry during what we now think of as the dot-com bubble. Undoubtedly was a bubble. When you set up Last Minute with Brent Hoberman, do you think you were unusually confident as a young woman business person? And if you were very confident, where did that confidence come from?
It's hard to do that self-analysis sometimes, isn't it? I mean, I think firstly, I was 25 when we started lastminute.com, right? And you're generous, it was 28 years, I think, that we launched the business. And I think that a lot of it was just naivety, to be honest. I think that, I really trusted Brent. It was Brent's idea, lastminute.com, and he generously shared it with me. And I think hopefully we turned it into something greater than the sum of both of us together. But I often think back to just how we just carried on. And I don't think I'd even thought 5 or 6 steps ahead. I really hadn't. And even when so many venture capitalists said, no way, we're not going to give you money for the business, we just carried on. And that's, I think, partly was youth and just inexperience, but partly, of course, I had an innate confidence. And I'm super lucky that I had a very stable family background. My father is an incredible person and never treated me any differently or expected that I was doing anything different to anybody else. And my mother was an entrepreneur herself, so I think all of that helps, of course. But also just that partnership that I was in with Brent, that gave me confidence because he was incredibly supportive and, really we worked together very closely. So all of these different things helped me massively.
But it hasn't been a life without serious setbacks. You had that appalling accident, which was life-changing. You did pick yourself up and talk to me about it because it's such an important moment in your life, and it is relevant to a conversation I wanted to have with you, which is one of the things that absolutely everybody's talking about at the moment is the extent to which disabled people should work, the extent to which the state should help disabled people to work, the extent to which employers have more responsibility to people who have disabilities. But it would be great if you didn't mind just talking about your own experience.
Sure. I mean, I joke sometimes with my friends that I'm one of the only people on the planet to have survived a .com crash, a virtual crash, and then a real world crash. And when they just happened to have happened in relatively quick succession. So I left lastminute.com in early 2004. I was going to have a couple of months off, turned into not quite what I was expecting when I had a very serious car accident in Morocco in May 2004. And broke pretty much every single bone you can break without finishing yourself off. I discovered recently, actually, that I should be in the Guinness Book of Records because I have broken more bones and survived than any other woman currently on the planet.
Seriously?
Yep.
Wow.
I'm going to write to the Guinness Book of Records. Unfortunately, a man has pipped me, obviously, by breaking one more and surviving. But anyway, I'm quite tempted just to break something else.
I didn't even know doctors counted the bones.
Yeah, they definitely do. I'm laughing, but it was actually a very funny matter. And I spent the next 2 years in hospital.
I just remember actually within our office because you were somebody that journalists knew and there was a real palpable sense of shock and people were really anxious about you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, the anxiety and the thoughts helped because I was very lucky, and despite nearly dying multiple times in hospital, after 2 years I was home, and then I've been able to build my life since then, but it is, irrevocably changed. I am now a disabled person, not an able-bodied person. And I've been in hospital multiple times since then and live, with the ambiguity, as many disabled people do, of, what might happen. And I think that that's a very different framing to life to the one that obviously I thought I was going to have, and also just gives you an insight about what that kind of disability can do to your capacity and your capability.
For somebody who was so active and so successful, how hard was it simply to accept that you were disabled?
It's only very recently that I have even really identified with myself as being a disabled person. I walk with 2 sticks. I am disabled. But for a long time, I thought that because I didn't want to be only characterized by what had happened to me, and I wanted to get back to work, and I wanted to still try and make an impact in this country, and I still wanted to use my small voice to try and do some things to help. That's that was just my own motivation for continually trying to get better and stronger. So it's only relatively recently, but now I'm more at peace with it at the grand old age of 52, and I feel as though now I also do have a bit more of a responsibility to think about it and help think about it in a way that can hopefully impact other disabled people's lives.
When you do suffer this kind of traumatic change, how conscious are you or how anxious are you that basically society doesn't understand and slightly writes you off? You talk about how hard it's been for you to, in a sense, publicly accept that you're disabled. Is that because you were just worried. You said you didn't want that to be how people sort of labelled you, but is it also because you thought, actually, we talked about a different kind of discrimination just for women, for example, raising money and in other ways in business. But was it just you were very anxious, you just didn't want to face that discrimination?
I think it's, yes, partly, but also because you don't want people to assume that you can't do the things that you might still be able to do. And you don't want to be put in what is still a bucket of, and I hate using that expression, sorry, but it is a kind of category of people that I think somehow still feel like they are lesser. Not always, but that is still, I think, unfortunately, how we characterize disabled people. And, as much of the narrative just this week, just yesterday, has been about, right? We talk about disabled people in a clump as though there's kind of one characteristic of disabled people, which is obviously completely nuts. We talk about, this complexity about, will they work? Can they work? From the horrible piece of, they're just leeching off the state through to, the complexities around what might help people get back into work. So I think it is still a very complex characterization.
In terms of your own, both physical and emotional rehabilitation, how important was it, in a sense, to get back on the treadmill?
Yeah, the treadmill felt quite far away at the beginning. I think for me, it has always given me a real purpose working. I've loved it, and I've been so lucky to do things that are relatively entrepreneurial. So I haven't had to go back into structures that were determined by other people. And I really recognize how difficult that must be if you're not in that fortunate position, because the single biggest thing, I guess, that shifted in my life from going able-bodied to disabled was flexibility, needing flexibility in working patterns, working, how you work, when you work. I work hard, but it is in a different way to how other people work. I'm very bad in the evenings. I'm more in pain at night. I don't really like going to networking events in the evening where I have to stand. It's just those things. And yes, a lot of the world that I move in, that's the kind of thing that you have to do. So it's just reckoning with all those different shifts, I guess. But for me, having a purpose is really important. So this might be ridiculous, but I decided to start a karaoke business.
I love Lucky Voice. I was going to say my favourite business of all your businesses is Lucky Voice. So I was going to say, was that the first thing that you did post?
It was. We kind of had the idea just pre the accident, and my poor co-founders were kind of again like, oh God, here we go. What are we going to do? She's half dead in a hospital bed. But I remember Nick, who co-founded the business with me, bringing models of what Lucky Voice was going to look like, as I could only lie flat, and I was looking at the layout, completely high on diamorphine, being totally unhelpful. But he would battle through that. Anyway, Lucky Voice is a relatively small business. We've just got a few venues around the country, mainly in London.
But it brings so much joy to people.
But it
like
brings
me.
joy, and also it really gives you a close track to what it is like to run a relatively small business in this country, particularly in hospitality and the challenges that people are facing right now. I go around as president of the BCC and you talk to people, but having that actual experience right in your own working life is invaluable for me. And just seeing what the team are up against on a kind of weekly or monthly basis and what different changes in the economy mean for a business in hospitality is really interesting. So yeah, Lucky Voice was kind of the first thing that I tried to put my very addled brain behind. And then, I got so lucky because I guess some of the things that I'd always been interested in, I do quite like the startup world, but what I really like is the impact of technology on society and broader institutional change that happens with technology. And so I was given the opportunity by Gordon Brown to think about that at a national level. And that really did change everything for me, because I began to think about just technology in a different way to how I'd thought about it before.
Okay, so just because this is important, as somebody who worked in technology, and then, as you say, Gordon Brown says, tell me about it, what was the big change in your thinking?
Well, I guess I had always been slightly engaged in the startup world, the excitements of e-commerce, as you say, the bubble, the burst, all the stuff, but, still a real believer in the change that was happening fundamentally to every single business because of digitization. But what I hadn't thought about so deeply was therefore what it meant for not only the broader economy, but people left behind. And that was the thing that Gordon Brown asked me particularly to focus on. And at that point, so that was 2009, there were about between 10 and 15 million adults who did not use the internet or didn't have access to it. And of course, mainly from more vulnerable groups or lower socioeconomic groups. And that was a real issue, in my opinion, of social justice, but also just economic help and clout, because I think at that point, and I'm not sure what the number is now, but unfortunately, I think it's pretty stubborn, there are about 1 million people not in work, not online. But at the same time, 99% of jobs were only advertised online. So that's just a bit dumb, because how are you meant to get back into work if you can't have the access to the internet to be able to find the work? So I became kind of a bit demonic about this issue and the digital divide in this country. And
Do you think the digital divide is obviously still with us to an extent, but do you think it is less pernicious than it was?
pernicious is a good word, because I think it's still there. I think it changes and shifts. It doesn't kind of stop, because now, as you know well and talk about a lot, the AI onslaught is going to give us a different kind of digital divide, in my opinion. And it is very pernicious for the people that don't have access. So I was chairing a committee in the Lords over COVID, looking at the long-term implications of COVID. And there were, at that time, we discovered one of the strands of work we looked at was families who didn't have access to technology during COVID, 2.5 million children who were sharing one device, often in a home with up to 4 or 5 children. I mean, so of course, then you've got a huge educational attainment gap for those children. So, you know, that is a few years ago, but it's still pernicious for the groups that are the most vulnerable, and that is a real problem. There is a digital inclusion plan. It came out about a month ago. Government is getting behind this in a way that has not been driven before. So, has been driven before, but not in the recent history. So I'm confident change will happen, but it's really important to keep the focus on it, because there's such an opportunity here. You know, imagine if we're a small country, we could easily be a country that had more connectivity and didn't leave groups behind. And then we'd just open up so many more possibilities to people.
I mean, there is, of course, a paradox, a rather painful paradox here, which is many of us, including me, think that overexposure to smartphones for teens and younger children is harmful.
Yes.
Therefore, you know, I think there is a very strong case for what they've done in Australia, which is to massively limit access for those under 16. But as you say, what you don't want is a generation of better off, privileged kids, you know, simply being masters of these technologies that are going to be our economic future, while, you know, large numbers of underprivileged kids are left behind.
And we have to face the fact that a lot of people's homework has to be driven and done online now, and that's demanded by the schools. And, you know, taking kids out of the equation, which I know is a big part of it, and I don't disagree with you at all. And my friend Beeban Kidron has done amazing work on this in the Lords. You know, that in my opinion, that is a subsection of the bigger issue, which is that we still have a huge number of adults not in work, without access to technology, stuck in that loop. We also have, you know, older people, again, stuck in the loop. I'm not trying to force them to do everything online, but we know that connectivity can help when you're, you know, getting older or disabled, and you know, doing shopping online, being able to just make your life that bit easier. And sometimes I find it slightly dementing that people who, you know, sitting there bashing away on their smartphones are saying, well, this isn't really an issue. I say, well, can you imagine if you didn't have access to some of the stuff that we now will take for granted?
I wanted to take us back to something we started with, which is the availability of finance, particularly for sort of younger, growing entrepreneurial businesses. We've talked about the difficulty that all women businesses have. Actually, you know, one of the things that is a deep concern is we have hundreds and hundreds of absolutely brilliant technology businesses, not just digital, some of them in life sciences, obviously across AI, who really struggle to get the finance that would turn them from, you know, businesses with $25 million of turnover to businesses with $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion of turnover. And then it's also interesting to me, because we've talked about the challenge of helping disabled people get not just remunerative, but also very satisfying work. The main thing the government is focusing on is how do you get employers to take a risk on disabled people. But the other side of it, and partly this is something that we can see from your life story, you know, maybe there should be, well, not maybe, I think there should be more finance for disabled people who want to create businesses, surely.
I completely agree. You know, it's well documented, and you've talked about it on the podcast, this scale-up gap that we face in this country, and it's very significant and could unlock so much growth if we were enabled businesses to get that, push through that kind of 100 million revenue it often is. I mean, it's sometimes smaller, but it is just becoming global or going for that big piece of investment or taking the next wave of risk, which we know is very, very hard in this country. And as you say, there are hundreds of businesses that have struggled to do that across every sector. I hear it from the digital side, but I also hear it when I'm traveling around the country for the British Chambers of Commerce and talking to businesses who are stuck in that gap. And a subsection of that is I completely agree with you that there are people for whom starting a business would be a way of having some kind of flexible work in a way. And I absolutely guarantee you that if you just look at disabled people, and as much as this is, again, you can't put it in one group of people, but to talk about it like slightly ineffectually, but that's how I would describe it now. Those people, I really believe, would work 5 times as hard on their businesses because they're already so resilient and tough in their life. It's not easy being a disabled person. You have to think about so many more things than an able-bodied person does to survive in daily life. So those people, in my opinion, you should be betting on them because they are already shown that they can be tough. And if they're saying, and in addition, I want to start a business, I would be betting on that person.
I mean, these are people who want to be winners and they've overcome incredible challenges.
Exactly. But it's very hard. I was at an event just last week talking to a bunch of disabled entrepreneurs and neurodiverse entrepreneurs. And some of the stories are heartbreaking. We have to be realistic that it's not very easy right now, full stop, in British business landscape. And if you're facing any kind of challenge, it's even tougher. So I'm optimistic and dispirited in equal measure, if that makes any sense at all.
But I mean, there are, though, some incredibly positive stories. A friend of mine, David Joseph, who used to run Universal, absolutely made a point because he just thought it would really help Universal, and I think it proved to be the case, of hiring neurodiverse people because he just recognised that these people, particularly when it came to creativity, had so much to offer.
Yes, 100%. And Alex Mahon, a friend of mine who runs Channel 4, I'm sure many people will know, she's done an incredible job at putting disability at the heart of how she's thinking about Channel 4, but as an employer, as a brand, and as a content creator, partly through the Paralympics and all of the stuff they did around that, but also as an employer. So it is really possible. I hear of programs all the time, but just, to hone in on entrepreneurship again, we don't take much risk in this country. I mean, you talk about this a lot. It just, we don't, full stop. And we don't take risk on people. We don't take risk on people that look different to the venture capital and the communities that are giving out finance. And that's a real shame because I do think we could build so many more incredible businesses if we were prepared to.
The other thing I just wanted to do was you are president of the British Chambers of Commerce, which represents some ludicrously large number of businesses. What's the number?
Yeah, it's 100,000 around the world because we have an incredible international chamber network, which many people don't know. So if you're going to start exporting to, Dubai or Singapore, you can find a British Chambers there to help you. So about 100,000 businesses around the world in 83 chambers. And it's an incredible network. It kind of reflects the broader economy. About 85% of our members are small and medium-sized businesses, which is reflective of the economy. And the thing that's really powerful about it is that it isn't some kind of national organization. It's local businesses coming together at a local level through their local chambers to build relationships with each other, with the council, with further education colleges, with lots of different important bits of the growth story for them in their local area. And I've absolutely loved being their president.
And apart from the issues that we've already talked about, what are the things when you talk to your members about the sort of challenges they face? What comes up most at the moment?
I mean, it does shift a bit at the minute because the landscape around us is shifting so much. And so at the minute, I think if you were to do a quick test of our members, and we do our quarterly research, which is really robust, people are anxious about next month because of the rate changes and the tax changes from the budget. And that is a big deal, a huge deal, especially for small businesses. And, I can see this from Lucky Voice and the hospitality sector. People are anxious about tariffs because who knows what's going to happen to their trading. And people are feeling anxious about the general state of the economy and whether or not the right things are being done. I think if you step out of right this minute, right this second, there are some broader themes that people just keep coming back to, some of which the government are very much addressing. Planning regulation, always something that comes up. Skills, something, Robert, I know that you have worked on hard, and Speakers for Schools is trying to do something about. But the skills challenge across every sector is still very intense, very intense. And the relationship with Europe, it's not talked about enough, in my opinion. It is big deal. I was really interested when I became president to learn that 63% of British Chambers members trade overseas, which is way higher than I think it's about 11% of businesses overall. I mean, obviously not every business can trade overseas, but there's something interesting about that. It's like the network effect of being shown how to do it, helping together in a local area to see the benefits. There's so much we could add to the economy if we crack that more and help businesses trade.
I mean, in terms of the grit in the machine that was introduced by Brexit, the bureaucracy, the non-tariff costs, which are very significant, to what extent do your members say, okay, that they're now sort of part of the furniture, we're dealing with them, or to what extent are they still an absolute pain?
I think they're an absolute pain. I think it is part of the furniture that is an absolute pain. And I know that it's put off many businesses from thinking about trading with Europe that might have been about to expand. And we've heard so many stories. I've heard of, there was the kind of sublime to the ridiculous. I've heard about racehorses that we were exporting into Europe getting stuck in their boxes on the way out from Dover because of some paperwork issue. And these are high quality racehorses. I think this is because I must have been at the Doncaster Racehorsing Training College, and it was nearly catastrophic, and we lost a whole bunch of very pure breed racehorses through to cheese being stuck. I mean, it's just the stories are endless, and that's the actual products. When you think then about the bureaucracy of the paperwork that goes alongside it, it's really difficult. It's really difficult.
As you say, employer national insurance, the increase about to come in. Is there a pattern to how businesses are coping with it? Are they planning to put prices up? Are they shedding the numbers of people they're employing? What can you tell us about how businesses are reacting?
I think it depends on the size of the business and the sector, obviously. But yes to all of that. I've heard stories.
So prices going up.
I think that some businesses will pass prices on to customers. It's not universal. I think.
What are you doing at Lucky Voice?
Lucky Voice, we've had to restructure the cost base, not just losing people, but doing slightly different hours. So working out when people were actually coming into the bar and staffing only around that, for example. Definitely looking, as every business can all the time as a small business, are we spending too much on XYZ thing, redoing our drinks deals, all
so
this
it's
stuff.
Painful.
Yeah, it's really painful. And we're a tiny business and it's not very many people and it really hurts. And the guy running it, Charlie's doing a great job, but it's hard. But more than, the anxiety I have as president of the BCC is that people aren't investing. And that's what we need them to do. We need them to invest in people. We need them to invest in the new technologies that are going to help their businesses in the future, which, you and I definitely agree are not optional. They're coming, and there's an anxiety about that. And I think that people are planning for the here and now as opposed for the slightly longer term. And that's just a really dangerous position for the economy to be in.
We've gone over ground that obviously is Steph and I are absolutely passionate about, and we've touched on artificial intelligence a bit today. Again, if you think about your members, how many of them are just terrified? How many of them are embracing, with optimism and knowledge and all the rest of it?
I mean, I think a year ago, we did a study about it. So this is a year-old data, and clearly this stuff moves incredibly fast. But a year ago, 84% of our members didn't quite know what to do next. And that wasn't just fear. It was probably more optimism. I know I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. And I hear this all the time. And I think that is probably true still. I've got a whole suite of products. I don't know which one to choose. Should I be investing in this, that, and the other? Where do I start? How far ahead am I should be thinking about this stuff? And I think a round table that I did a few months ago really ran this home to me so sharply. It was like a visualization of what I think is happening in the economy. On one side was a guy running an insurance business who said, I've mapped out how I'm going to reorganize my processes, because a lot of this is about reorganizing your business and thinking about it in a different way, not just about cost cutting, but about helping your people do more. And I've really got a plan. And the guy next door to me said, what's ChatGPT? And I thought, this is it, right? This is what's happening, that some people are absolutely facing into it. And I would argue that they're the people that are going to be more successful than the people that this other guy knew it was important, but he just didn't know quite where to start.
I don't know whether you'd call me an evangelist. I am somebody who thinks it is transforming the economy literally from top to bottom. But every now and then I get examples of what businesses are doing that, slightly surprise even me in terms of how fast we're moving to an AI world. So I was talking to, a global provider of online services that provide all sorts of things like sort of financial management and HR management to big companies. And their latest product is an a human resources tool that allows companies to manage their artificial intelligent agents, effectively digital robots, in the way that these people would manage their own employees, which is sort of does your head in, that basically they're taking the view that companies are moving very fast to seeing, these, as I say, AI, artificial intelligence agents as the equivalent of their physical employees. And they need the same kind of management tools.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting. And, I've been doing some work in government. We've been looking at the digital centre of government. It's kind of a mouthful of words. We've been trying to work out what the right names for all the bits of structure we're building are. But there's obviously a huge push in government right now to think about AI from lots of angles. Matt Clifford did his AI Opportunities Action Plan, which was very much about building the sector of AI in this country. The data centres, the companies that are going to be the AI only or AI first companies. But the bit that was slightly missing from all of that, and I know this is something you've talked about, is, how does that affect the BCC members? What's the government's plan for the dissemination of this in as much as government can help in some ways, and what should they be doing about it? And how do we make sure that that happens both in the public sector and in the private sector? And it's really hard because it's moving very fast in some ways. But when you look at government, just to go back to the digital centre of government work I've been doing, government departments have very, very different qualities of data by department. They don't join up. You've got to get those basic infrastructure pieces right before you can start doing the whizzy AI stuff on top very often. So a very patchy network of how to move forward. And this stuff is complicated and tough.
It's complicated. It's actually also, I was talking to a sort of senior member of the government about this recently. If the government gets right both rational organisation of the data and then moves in a secure and efficient way to AI delivery of lots of services, actually, this could be a money winner for the government, because that is a system that you could actually export to other governments in the way that, for example, Margaret Thatcher exported the idea of privatisation to other governments. And you could find yourself in a position where you could actually charge other governments for our know-how.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have had the charging example. We created the government digital service, which built gov.uk, and gov.uk was ripped and taken by lots of governments and used as even the source code because it was a really world-leading site at that time. It continues to be pretty good. I like the idea that it can be a money spinner too. There's quite a lot of buts in there, right? There's quite a lot of things that government have to get right before that can happen. I am 100% of the belief that there is a huge amount that can be done through both central and local government using AI more effectively, of course. And there are hundreds of examples, in social care right now, how they're using things on a kind of sporadic basis, even, in different councils. But this requires investment, and it requires focus, and it requires skills. And, there's a spending review coming up. We've got to make sure that the government understands that this requires investment to get both productivity gains and money out of the system. And it's still quite few bits of this equation to make happen before all of these kind of nirvana type government services can be delivered.
We're almost out of time, but I did want to pick up on something you referred to earlier. And you're definitely not going to be the only person who has been, shall we say, sort of shocked by the macho behaviour of some of the sort of titans of Silicon Valley, not just Musk, but the extent to which that whole generation of multi billionaires who created whether it's Meta or Amazon just became these sort of breathless cheerleaders for Trump. Were you surprised by this sort of macho rallying around Trump? What are your reflections on it?
I feel very dumb now that I was surprised, because I still kind of held out the belief, which was probably too hardwired in me from the late 90s, that there was something more values-based in these companies, and that there was more of a moral core and a moral compass in them. But, in the end, there isn't much moral core to these companies. And I was really disappointed to see them all just do such an incredible volte-face to protect their own interests. But more than that, as someone who genuinely felt in the late 90s and for a bit of time and still occasionally does, that these technologies could have been more equalizing and given more opportunity to people. And I just thought, if this is what success looks like in the industry that I have built my career in and around, then I feel really effed off, because that's not what success looks like to me, and I don't like it. And I was on the board of Twitter when we sold it to Elon, and I had some direct dealings with him, and all of the stuff that is happening right now is just so dispiriting if you still believe in the power of technology to be something slightly different.
One aspect of it, funny enough, I wrote about something like 15 years ago in a book called How Do We Fix This Mess, is
available at all good bookshops.
Still available,
listeners.
Still available, still highly relevant. Is the extent to which, when you become as wealthy as these people become, and you can, metaphorically just live on a plane, an airline, and circle the globe, you're not really attached to anywhere, and you have no real experience of what lives are like. That is just dehumanizing.
Yes, of course. The thing that really, really wound me up, more than wound me up, made me feel sick, was the sight of Elon in the Oval Office with his child talking about slashing other people's jobs. And I just thought, on every level, this is revolting. Can you imagine if that had been a woman who had brought a child into that particular situation? That was the first thing that wound me up. Secondly, using a child as a kind of defense shield was gross. The way he was standing towering over the elected president, whatever you may think of him, he was still the elected president. And the way he was just blindly saying, and later did it with a chainsaw, didn't he? I mean, the whole thing was so absurdly disgusting. I couldn't quite compute it, because, as you say, it's completely divorced from reality and any empathy or understanding that, sure, government could be made more efficient. Sure, we can always look, but there's about what kind of society you want to build, how you want to treat people, and the role of the state in people's lives, which are complex, nuanced issues. And it's just really depressing that gets lost.
You and I think, are both believers that we're fortunate that this is a country that's given us enormous opportunities. It's been very, very tough for 15 years for millions of people. I am an optimist that we can turn this round.
Me too. I think that there's incredible capacity in this country, unbelievable talent and resilience and resourcefulness. And we have so many things going in our favour. We're a small country, just in landmass. That's why I get so kind of maniacal about connectivity, because if we were completely connected, and can you imagine if we were really as highly skilled as we could be? We've got amazing universities. We've got so many businesses started and being built. There's just a few bits of the equation that need real driving force, unlocking finance for people, making sure that we're helping people get back into work, focusing on young people. Everyone will have their own things. So I am still optimistic, but it doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen. And I think that it's up on all of us who have a small voice to try and make that the case.